Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us quite a fascinating set of sources today, really centered around this book, The Final Journey, a detailed exploration of Princess Diana's death.
Yeah, and it's more than just a timeline. It really pulls together personal accounts, official reports, expert analysis, trying to get a full picture of the events around her death, but also, crucially, her lasting impact.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack all that material. We want to pull out the key insights, understand the complexities of Diana's story, her life, that awful night, the investigations, and the powerful legacy she left.
Exactly. It's a chance to go beyond just the headlines we all remember, to understand the dynamics the sources talk about, the immense pressure she was under, the circumstances of that night, what the investigations found, and the influence she still has.
Right. Let's start maybe before she was this huge global figure. The sources, they take us back. Diana Frances Spencer, born into a world already connected to the royals, Park House, Sandringham, 1961.
And it was, privileged in many ways, typical British aristocracy, but her childhood also had significant turmoil. The book really highlights her parents' divorce, which was quite bitter apparently when she was only 8. That left a deep mark.
Yeah, the sources mentioned she was remembered as quite shy at school, but even then there was this warmth, this ability to connect with people, a quality that really defined her later on.
Absolutely. And then this, shy young woman is suddenly, at just 19, thrust onto the world stage. The courtship with Prince Charles starts in 1980, and then boom, the wedding of the century in 81.
And the public just fell in love with the idea, didn't they? This fairy tale princess, a new era.
Yeah.
But the sources are pretty clear underneath that surface. Royal life, plus that intense media focus from day one, it brought enormous pressure.
Yeah, they really stressed that duality. The public adored her, but privately she was struggling. The book talks quite openly about her battle with bulimia. She called it a secret disease, directly linked, it seems, to the stress and that constant scrutiny. And her marriage, that became strained very quickly too.
And that media attention.
Yeah.
Wow. The sources emphasize it wasn't just intense, it was like unparalleled. Right from the start, her life was lived under this relentless lens.
It's such a paradox, isn't it? The book points out she was both a beneficiary and, a victim. Her humanitarian work, it reached millions because of the media. But that same coverage just intruded constantly into her private life.
She seemed to understand its power, though. The sources show her using it quite strategically for her charity work. Those visits to hospitals, homeless shelters, the landmine sites, documented to highlight important causes.
But the cost was huge. The weight of her role, her personal struggles, her marriage breaking down very publicly, it all became tabloid fodder, which, only made her feel more isolated, more insecure.
The sources also mentioned those later interviews where she spoke so candidly about bulimia, about mental health. That was quite revolutionary back then, helped break down some stigma.
Definitely, and you really get a sense of how hard it must have been to maintain any kind of genuine connection with people under that constant watch. The scrutiny didn't just report on her marriage problems, it seemed to magnify them, playing out in the full glare of the public eye.
Okay, let's fast forward now to August 1997. The sources give a really detailed picture of her final weeks. What was that period like, according to the book?
Well, it describes her as being in transition, sort of trying to redefine herself outside the main royal structure, balancing downtime with her ongoing work. The book covers that time in the Mediterranean with Dodi Al-Fayed on the yacht Jonquil. And of course, that relationship became this huge media focus itself.
Right, inevitably. But despite that intrusion, the sources say she was still focused on her humanitarian work, her future plans, landmines, mental health awareness.
Those were still very much on her agenda. And crucially, the book notes she spent time with William and Harry at Balmoral. That relationship, that bond, seemed to be a real source of strength for her.
Her return to London wasn't just downtime either. There were meetings, like a visit to the Royal Brompton Hospital.
Exactly, showing her continued commitment to healthcare things.
And then the trip to Paris with Dodi. The sources suggest it was meant as an escape.
Yeah, an escape from the spotlight, ironically. But the media presence there was just inescapable. It followed them right to the Ritz, setting the scene for what happened next.
Let's get into those details now. That night, August 30th into the 31st, 1997, in Paris. What do the sources tell us about the moments leading up to the crash?
Well, the book describes them trying to basically dodge the photographers camped outside the Ritz. So around 12:20 a.m. on the 31st, Diana and Dodi decided to use a rear exit onto Rue Cambon, who was, a deliberate move to try and get away privately.
And the driver wasn't their usual one.
No, it was Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz. Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard, was with them in the front passenger seat. The plan, it seems, was maybe a diversion tactic. Henri Paul driving them, while Doty's regular driver left from the front.
But leaving from the back didn't shake the photographers.
Not at all. The sources described their car, a Mercedes S280, speeding away but being actively chased by paparazzi on motorbikes and in cars. That pursuit is a really key element in the accounts.
And the crash itself? In the Pont de l'Alma tunnel?
Yes, it happened fast. Around 12:23 a.m., the car goes into the tunnel, and that tunnel, it's got curves, pillars down the middle. It's not straightforward. The book recounts the car veering, losing control, and hitting the 13th pillar head-on. The estimated speed was, over 100 kilometers an hour, a massive impact.
The immediate aftermath must have been horrific.
Utterly. Henri Paul and Doty Alfayed were killed almost instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones survived, but with terrible injuries. Diana, in the back, she had catastrophic internal injuries, but the sources say she was conscious initially at the scene.
Help got there quickly, though.
Yes, emergency services were fast. The book even mentions an off-duty doctor, Frederick Melez, who stumbled upon the scene and gave first aid. He described her as being in shock, but somehow resilient in those first moments.
But ultimately, her injuries were just too severe.
Exactly. The sources detail the efforts at the scene and then at the hospital, PT-Salpêtrière. But yeah, they were insurmountable. At 4 a.m., that awful announcement came. Diana had died.
And the news hitting the world. I mean, it's hard to overstate that reaction, isn't it?
Oh, completely. It was just immense, immediate disbelief, this wave of profound sorrow washing over everyone. The book talks about the spontaneous tributes everywhere. Kensington Palace gates in London just became this incredible sea of flowers, notes, candles, and you saw similar things worldwide, like vigils at the British Embassy in D.C.
And the media, so central to her life, became central again, but controversially.
Absolutely. On one hand, their coverage amplified the grief, brought it into everyone's living rooms, but it also immediately sparked this huge debate, didn't it? About the paparazzi's role in the chase, about media ethics overall. Critics were saying, the demand for those pictures fueled the invasiveness that contributed to the tragedy.
World leaders weighed in too.
Yes, people like President Clinton at the time calling her compassionate and caring. It really showed her global reach.
What about the royal family's response? The sources touch on the perception, at least initially, that it was a bit different.
The book mentions that. Their initial response from Balmoral, where they were staying, felt quite reserved to many people, maybe even a bit detached compared to the public outpouring. But then the Queen's televised address, that was a real turning point. Paying tribute to Diana as an exceptional and gifted human being, that resonated. It showed she was listening.
And the funeral itself was just this massive global event.
Unbelievable scale. September 6th, 1997. Millions lining the streets in London for the procession to Westminster Abbey. And that image the sources highlighted of Prince Charles, William, and Harry walking behind the coffin. Incredibly powerful.
Inside the Abbey, it was a mix of state occasion and very personal moments.
Right. Earl Spencer's eulogy, her brother's tribute was so raw and heartfelt. And then Elton John performing the rewritten Candle in the Wind. That just became this iconic moment of collective mourning, didn't it? But also a celebration of her life.
So after a tragedy like that, the immediate focus shifts to why and how, which led to these big investigations, but also, as the sources detail, this firestorm of speculation and conspiracy theories.
That's right. The first major official investigation was the French one, led by Judge Hervé Steffen. His findings came out in 1999. The conclusion was essentially that the crash was caused by Henri Paul's reckless driving, stating he was under the influence of alcohol and prescription drugs. But they also noted the paparazzi pursuit as a contributing factor.
And then the British launched their own, Operation Paget.
Yes, a really massive undertaking, headed by Lord Stevens. Its specific job was to look into all those conspiracy theories that had sprung up, and there were many.
What did Paget conclude?
It finished in 2006, and its findings were pretty stark. No evidence to support any of the conspiracy theories. It basically backed up the French conclusions, blaming Henri Paul's driving, being impaired, and the whole unfortunate situation, including the pursuit. Human error and bad circumstances, essentially.
But the sources point out that despite these official findings, doubts lingered. Why do you think that was?
Well, the book explores that. There were things people latched onto, perceived discrepancies, maybe conflicting witness accounts about what happened right after the crash, questions about how the scene was handled, debates over Henri Paul's exact condition. Even if official reports addressed these, they sort of fueled mistrust for some.
And that uncertainty created space for the conspiracy theories to really take hold. What were the main ones the sources cover?
Probably the most prominent, certainly the one pushed hardest by Muhammad al-Fayed, was this idea that Diana and Dodi were deliberately killed. That elements within the British establishment, the security services, maybe even the royal family orchestrated it to stop Diana marrying a Muslim man.
And there was another common one involving MI6, sometimes linked to a letter Diana apparently wrote.
Yeah, that one suggested MI6 involvement, sometimes connected to fears Diana herself had reportedly expressed, or this letter where she allegedly predicted she'd die in a car crash arranged by my husband. Again, Paget found absolutely no evidence for this, but these narratives became very powerful for some people.
It's interesting how the sources try to understand why these theories persisted.
They look at the psychology behind it. Conspiracy theories can offer seemingly simple, maybe more dramatic, answers for complex, awful events. It fulfills a need, perhaps, for there to be a reason for someone to be in control rather than just tragedy. The book also points to cultural factors like general mistrust of institutions and how easily these ideas spread now with the internet and media amplifying them, even without proof. The key takeaway from the sources isn't that there was a conspiracy, but that the circumstances allowed those theories to flourish.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. Beyond the crash and the investigations, the sources spent a lot of time on Diana's legacy, particularly her compassion, her humanitarian work.
Yeah, and this was just so central to who she was, how she connected with people. The book highlights how she championed causes that were, often quite stigmatized or ignored back then.
That moment with the AIDS patient, the sources really emphasize that, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.